Ladies and gentlemen, it is time. It's time for some of that sweet, easy React content. And today we're going to be watching Difficulty versus Accessibility by accessibility consultant, I believe, Ian Hamilton, who you may be familiar with from Twitter. Oh, high vis, yellow, white, and black. Let's go. Accessible.
Hello, I'm Ian. I am an accessibility specialist with a background in UX and design before that, and I am here to talk
UX. Oh, no. 2 letters I hate. Let's go.
to you about 2 words, about difficulty and about accessibility. So if you spent much time in accessibility discourse on social media, or even just general gamer discourse, you've probably seen this crop up. People saying things like,
I have, certainly.
This game was designed with a specific difficulty in mind. I'm fine with accessibility options, but not difficulty options.
I've seen something like that, sure, yeah.
Accessibility and difficulty are different things, and I hate when people try to conflate them.
I've seen that a ton of times, and normally it's from people with impairments, people who have challenges beyond that of the average person. It's an interesting choice to pick an example, and this isn't a direct quote, I guess. Maybe someone has said this, but even if they have, I'm sure there are people who have said this without expressing hatred, without mentioning a negative emotion. So in a video that's meant to be plain and, I suppose, academic and educational, the people you disagree with, it's a little bit wormy to choose an example where they're presented as expressing a strong negative emotion, because that will aid your side in making the other side look unreasonable, which is not a strategy I'd go for if I didn't want to get into a shit-flinging fight.
So maybe some of these sound familiar to you. If not, you should feel grateful.
And my man, he says that. He's been in the trenches. This isn't stolen valor. My man has had a lot of these messages. It's true.
But anyway, that's what I'm here to talk about. Those 2 words, difficulty and accessibility. Are they conflated? Should they be? And what is the relationship between them?
Let's get an early answer in. Yes, but the biggest problem isn't conflation, but equivocation, where people try to argue against what someone has said using one definition of a word by functioning on a different definition of the same word. So there's a lack of connection in meaning.
Start with one core truth. Difficulty doesn't exist in games.
One core truth. You know what's really fucking important if you're going to make a claim like this? Define difficulty very, very clearly. And then once you have this as a rebuttal to the previous claims that other people have said, doesn't mean shit if your definition of difficulty is different to what people mean when they said it in the previous quotes. You're not actually responding to them. You're talking past them. Let's see what happens.
Games don't have difficulty. That concept is not valid.
100% agree. On a very pedantic level, I agree. They don't have difficulty. Maybe a better way to say it is they present difficulty.
What games actually have is barriers. And difficulty, on the other hand, is something that springs into existence when people play the game. It's something that players experience as a product of their personal capabilities versus the barriers that a game presents.
Not disagreeable. The specific word barrier, the negative connotations that come with it, as if it's, you want to break through barriers, right? That already sort of frames it as something bad you want to get past. But yeah, what he's saying is right. There are challenges you'll be faced with, and how difficult you find it is reliant on your abilities. True, fine. Sorry, to pause again. For the most part, it's fine. If you're talking about video games that are a single-player experience. If you're talking about all games, that's wrong as fuck. But, hold on.
This is why, if you and I play the same game, one of us will find it easier than the other.
It's going to be me finding it easier. Anyway.
Because the level of difficulty experienced is relative to the person playing, and humans are a pretty varied bunch.
True. Fair, fair.
So that's a little bit about difficulty. What about accessibility? Well, first we need to look at what disability is. Disability is one of the few things in life that there's actually global consensus on. It's defined as part of the UNCRPD, which is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which nearly every country on earth is signed up to.
My man goes off of logic and rationality for one claim. This is a core truth. Games don't have difficulty. Makes a rational argument. Now, for another definition, he's relying on consensus, which just is absolutely fecund with more questions. Does global consensus beat a logical or rational deduction? Would a logical or rational deduction beat global consensus? Now you have competing standards of which definitions to accept. You've made your video into a car crash, as far as I'm concerned, just by doing this.
And that's based on the social model of disability, which states that disability and impairment are two different things. An impairment is something that somebody has, an attribute, and disability is a state rather than an attribute. And people are disabled by mismatched interactions between their impairment and some kind of barrier.
This is reasonable. Some of you might be, just because you're so used to saying someone has a disability, this might cause a little bit of the old mental friction. But this is reasonable and an interesting way to think about things. Let's say you are wheelchair bound. Your legs don't work for whatever reason, or maybe your legs work but you can't walk, and maybe you have a cardiac issue that means you have to be in a wheelchair. You want to get somewhere, there are only fucking stairs. You're disabled in that your ability to do things is limited. Let's say same situation, but everywhere is perfectly accessible. You have no more challenge getting anywhere than someone who isn't wheelchair bound. Are you disabled? Are you unable to do something? No. Specifically walking, but to do the things you want to do, go somewhere, you're not disabled. It's just one way of looking at it. And a good way of looking at it when you're thinking of solutions to people's problems.
Resulting in difficulty performing a task. Accessibility means avoiding that mismatch. So, difficulty is the product of capability versus barrier.
How hard you find something, you suck, you have bad hand-eye coordination, you're playing a shooter, difficulty is going to be higher than someone who has just higher inherent hand-eye coordination, fine motor control, etc. Fine.
Disability is the product of mismatched interaction between capability and barrier.
In some contexts.
And accessibility means avoiding unnecessary mismatch between capability and barrier.
Unnecessary mismatch. That's a can of worms. That's a gigantic can of worms, right? If we're talking about, I don't know what it would fall under. Civil engineering, making a city that's accessible to people. There might be some choices for safety, maybe, that result in literal physical access to somewhere being challenging, but you can't completely smooth it out for, say, someone in a wheelchair. I guess that would be necessary mismatch, because everyone will die if the suspended park collapses. I don't know. Future cities. I don't know. But what's necessary or unnecessary mismatch in a video game? This isn't important to your life. You don't need to go anywhere in a video game, in pretend world, in a digital toy. I mean, any mismatch is unnecessary. So if you get rid of all unnecessary difficulty in a video game, every game would just be reading a PDF. Let's give him a chance. Let's give him a chance. I'm making assumptions. That's on me. Let's listen.
This means that all accessibility options affect difficulty. For example,
that's fair. They do. They do. If you're colorblind and a game relies on color, I think everyone would agree, or most people would agree. I don't think I need to specifically argue this. An option that changes colors or applies a color filter so you can better see on par with someone who doesn't have your challenge. that is an accessibility option, and it makes it easier for you. If you cannot see the fucking colors in like a color matching puzzle, that's way harder than if you can. You apply the accessibility option of like a color filter that works for your particular kind of color blindness. You can now tell the differences. It's easier and more accessible. It is going to affect the difficulty if we're defining difficulty as your abilities versus what you're coming against. Fine.
If you remove colorblindness accessibility, what you're left with is a disabling barrier that makes the game more difficult for colorblind people.
Oh, okay, yeah. This guy's great. He makes great points. I think we're going to run into the key issue, though. This is fuckery and equivocation. Remember what the people said at the start. They like accessibility options, don't like difficulty options. I would say the people who say they don't like difficulty options are saying, under this framework, they don't want the barrier to be changed. The barrier, the substance. They're okay with the difficulty being changed under this framework because providing options for accessibility will affect the difficulty under these definitions, but it's very clear that the people saying I'm okay with accessibility stuff but not with changing difficulty, they don't mean difficulty equals capability versus barrier. Ian isn't being smart, he's just being uncharitable and not treating communication as a two-way street. He's not doing the work of understanding what's really being said. So in the case of colorblindness, they want people to be able to reach the barrier and tackle it on fair terms, but not for the barrier itself to be completely different. Like the weightlifting contest at the gym, if you're in a wheelchair, you should be able to get there. Like there should be a slope you can go up or a little lift or something. That would be nice. That makes the weightlifting contest accessible, but the weightlifting contest is still a weightlifting contest.
And the reverse is true as well. All difficulty options affect accessibility. They modify barriers, and any barrier is going to be disabling for someone with some kind of impairment.
Say modify barriers?
All difficulty options affect accessibility. They modify barriers, and any barrier is going to be disabling for someone with some kind of impairment.
So difficulty options he recognizes are not, he uses air quotes, difficulty options are not difficulty options, they're barrier changes. And yet he doesn't apply this understanding to the original statements of his ideological opponents. Curious.
So while difficulty and accessibility don't mean exactly the same thing, they are intimately related.
Agree. Difficulty and accessibility, under this framework, very intimately related. Sure, true.
There's no dividing line with accessibility over here and difficulty over there.
There can be. Now he's equivocating, because we have run into this issue where he went difficulty options, right? It's not really a difficulty option. It's a barrier option in this little formula he's made. And not a formula, in this little equation he's made, they're barrier options.
Over here and difficulty over there. Changing one changes the other.
If, as he alluded to, what people mean when they say difficulty, they mean barriers, there is, Ian, a huge dividing line between accessibility and barriers, but not between accessibility and difficulty. The barrier is the thing you're accessing. There is a difference between a path to a building and the building itself.
And balance is what it comes down to. Games can't be balanced. That's another concept that really isn't valid.
This is wrong as fuck. This is insanely fucking wrong. And I doubt he's going to go into much. Some games, some elements of games, your game experience perhaps can be balanced. Games can be balanced. A perfectly symmetrical competitive FPS, 1v1. The map, no matter which side you start on, it's the same for both of you. Any item pickups, it's symmetrical. Your characters have the same abilities, you have the same gun. The game is balanced. The player's abilities won't be balanced, but the game itself internally is balanced. Balancing a game is really easy. Having a game that's fun and exciting and balanced, harder, but you totally can balance a game. And what people mean by a balanced game normally is that the internal elements are balanced.
They can be balanced to an individual, but they can't just be balanced in general.
For a single player experience that has an insanely very stupidly specific experience in mind for the player. I think the creation of games with a particular specific experience that every player should have, when you're designing a game like that, I think that's a huge problem with modern big budget gaming, that they do that to begin with, personally.
Most barriers are actually unnecessary and many are unintended.
Literally all barriers in a game are unnecessary. Video games are unnecessary. They are toys. They can also be art. They can have elements of them can be art. As a whole, they can be art. Whatever. Art's unnecessary. I like it a lot, but do we need it? Technically, no. I would also say hitting a barrier isn't a bad thing, man. I love Zachtronics games. You want to talk about smashing your head into a barrier? Yeah, I like that though. I like the sense of coming up against something that is just a steel wall to me. Even if that means I have to stop the game. Even if that means I stop playing and never come back to it. The experience of trying to scale that wall is enjoyable, even if I never make it. It's not just the satisfaction of overcoming it, no. The experience of that challenge, the experience of the failure and the straining is actually enjoyable. Now, I guess under these definitions, I'm disabled now. Perhaps I can use those special parking spots because my ability was mismatched to a barrier, and therefore Exapunks has put me into a position of disability. But it is what it is.
And some of these barriers can be avoided by default, and that should always be the first port of call. But some can't, because there's...
Barriers should always be avoided as the first port of call. Maybe unintended ones. Like, I guess if your game is literally broken, let's pick an example where he's obviously correct. Soft locks or hard locks. If your game is broken on a technical level and you can reach a situation where it's impossible to progress no matter what your ability, actually, yeah, fair enough. That's kind of a bad barrier. That's not good. You ever played Mario Maker or Mario Maker 2? You ever hit one of those player-designed soft locks? That is horrible. Not for any moral reason, just because it's annoying as fuck.
Should always be the first port of call. But some can't, because there's still that variance in needs and capabilities to account for. Humans...
You don't have to account for it. You don't have to account for it. Games don't have to exist to be beaten. By everyone, at least. Look at Massacre games. Most people who play those games never beat them. I think most people get enjoyment out of them, though, and they're designed to not be beaten. Specifically to not be beaten by most people. So I think there's a problem with this guy's view of video games overall and what they are. They're not just a... gobble them up. That's not necessary.
Cover a rich spectrum of variance. So being able to adjust barriers in line with that human variance means that players have some means of addressing the ways in which the game is uniquely unbalanced for them.
Why is that bad? He has to tell us why an unbalanced experience is bad. Maybe you get frustrated, but hey, this guy supports games as art as far as I'm aware. Why can't art frustrate you and piss you off? Via providing a barrier. That seems very artsy to me, personally, but what do I know?
And that's especially the case if a developer has a particular level of difficulty in mind, a particular level of challenge, because what's difficult for one person is easy for another and impossible for another. So options let more people have the kind of experience the developer intended.
This, in a vacuum, if you ignore everything else he said, makes sense. You want people's experience to be at a particular level of difficulty. I'm sure there are some developers with that in mind. I'm sure AAA developers, or designers at least, or suits, have in mind a level of difficulty that means people get through as much of the game as possible. They're probably looking at analytics and being like, our QA testers are getting stuck at this point. Make it easier so that everyone can get over this hurdle. But the big question is how you achieve the right individual balance? How do you give the person the right level of difficulty if you want them to have a particular experience? If you want the mismatch between the barrier and their ability to be a certain level, I'd look at it like this, based on this framework. Accessibility raises them up to be able to take on the challenge as if they were at the same level as someone who wasn't impaired. Changing the barrier means they're playing a different game, because the game is the barrier. The barrier is the game. The game and its barriers are inseparable. If you change the barrier, you're playing a different game. Changed the rules of the game. What are games? Really a set of rules. We think of video games as a game. You say a game, you mean a video game. But most of what a video game isn't game. It's art, it's music, it's story, typically at least, especially if we're talking AAA experiences, which this seems, personally to me, to be geared towards. The game part is the rule set, and throughout history, most games are just a set of rules. Most games people have ever played are competitive, and it's a set of rules that two groups of people, or two or more teams, perhaps even individuals, agree to interact under.
What really matters is the kind of experience that we want our players to have, and whether any given barrier either enables or gets in the way of players having that intended experience.
Okay, that's fine. He's talking about the barrier enabling the experience or getting in the way of that particular experience. But that is such a narrow, ultra-precise way to formulate a game experience. People talk about Dark Souls a lot in terms of this discourse, TM, and it having an intended level of difficulty. But to me, one of the defining features, even stronger than the difficulty of a first playthrough or the first time you experience a game like that, is the freedom of approach. I don't feel like Dark Souls has such a strongly intended, specific level of difficulty. It's an egg you can crack in so many different ways. Regardless of your ability, how you decide to play, how you decide to build is going to have a massive impact on your difficulty, your mismatch between what you're able to do and the barriers you have to overcome. Go magic in Elden Ring. I don't think that many games, except the most absolute basic slop AAA, are designed with people having a very particular level of difficulty throughout the whole thing in mind. I don't think that's how games are designed, and if it is, they shouldn't be, because it has terrible effects on the outcome.
And a game's set of barriers is not the intended experience. It's just a means to an end. It's a framework that we design to try to engender an emotional experience.
Ooh, not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are tons and tons and tons and tons of games where the barrier is all there is. And then the music, the art, the story, any emotional response is just set dressing. Look at time trial games. Look at racing games. A game called Lovely Planet, you just go through these levels and shoot targets. It's about getting better. Neon White has a story, it has anime waifus, it has all sorts of stuff, it has collectibles. But the barriers are there for barriers' sake, and to sharpen yourself against them and become better and get better scores and better times. He's talking about a very narrow subset of games. This isn't universal at all.
And accessibility exists to enable that vision, to improve that framework, to ensure as much of our target audience as possible actually have the kind of experience we imagine them having.
What about people who don't subscribe to that philosophy of art? Or that view of what a game should be and what experience a game should give? What if you just make something because it's fucking cool? What if you're just like, I think this is just right. I'm not creating this as a crowd pleaser. I think this is good. And then you go, oh, there's some people who have impairments who can't engage with this good. They lack the capability to engage with it. Within a reasonable range, okay, lift them up by giving whatever they need to get to the barrier, but don't change the barrier, because then if what you've made is good, you've turned it into something different. The barriers themselves can be enjoyable. Some people don't enjoy that. Some people just want to slog through a title and go, I beat that. Or they just care about the story, and the barriers are there really just to pad time. That's sad. But hey, some people play games like that. It's fine. Different strokes. But I would call myself very much a barrier-oriented gamer. I like the game part of games. I'm going to say what he's saying isn't valid from my perspective on games, and in fact is incredibly, incredibly narrow. What he's saying is true for one kind of game and one approach to design and one approach to what a game should be and who it should be for. Yes, there is a vast diversity of human capability. There can also be a vast diversity of experiences people have with a game, and that can be okay. That's fine. If you're getting fucked because you're colorblind and the game uses colors in a way you can't deal with, that sucks. That sucks. And if I want them to be able to even engage with the barrier, give them a tool that lets them approach that barrier, don't change the barrier. You've given them something else. If someone's physically impaired, let's say they literally have missing digits or something, a controller that enables them to do the inputs, sure. Nice. That's like having an accessible gym, right? You get the path to the thing smooth, but then once you're actually at the thing, thanks to the little bit of help, you're on par to approach the same barrier as other people on a more even footing. Now, to devil's advocate my own points, there are, let's say, cognitive disabilities, or to use his framework, cognitive impairments. Maybe you literally, I don't know, would this be cognitive, neurological impairment? I don't know. Reaction time. Let's say you just literally cannot, you physically cannot react as fast as the average person, or you physically cannot react fast enough to ever, no matter how much you tried or how hard you tried, get past a challenge in a game. You can say, here's the challenge, here's the barrier, here's where they are. They can reach it if you bring it down here. And then the difference between them and the barrier will be the same as if the barrier's up here and the average person is here. That's going to be hard as hell to calculate. That shit would need an AI doing it for you to make it so it's exactly the same as if you didn't have that impairment. I don't think any accessibility option now can actually preserve the intended, if there is an intended level of difficulty, or make it possible. Another way to do it would be, let's say someone's impaired in such a way that the reaction time is super slow. You can make the window they're allowed to press things and succeed wider. Maybe that would work, but there comes a point until you have technology to like scan a person and then make the game appear as it does exactly to someone else to give them the exact same experience. This talk about matching barrier to ability is like woo. It's woo-woo. It's fantasy. We can't do that. And I think it's a tech problem. If that's what you're aiming for, I think you need some advanced fucking tech, and you need to be able to scan people and have use that information to alter the game in a very precise way. For now, I think the best philosophy is to lift people up, to give people access to the barrier, but not knock the barrier down. Anyway, that is Ian Hamilton with IGDA. IGDA something, I don't remember. It's at the beginning of the video if you want to go to see which exact IGDA body, whatever they have, sect. There's details if you want to talk to him, whatever. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks.